Midwest, America's biggest harvest has eliminated hand-picking and put the farmer at the wheel of a computer-controlled maximum efficiency machine. Nebraskan John Sandahl is harvesting corn in a John Deere 12-row combine. The air-conditioned cab may seem cushy, and combining corn may look a bit like mowing the lawn. But this harvest demands a sharp eye and fast decision-making.
While harvesting corn, we're scanning the corn head all the time, watching for objects in the field, make sure that all the row units are functioning properly, pulling the corn stalks down through. And this corner post monitors all the functions of the machine. The first one down here has the engine RPM, the speed that I'm traveling. The middle one is the grain loss monitor. That's very important. It keeps track, monitors how much grain the combine is losing out the back.
A small percentage of the harvested corn drops back in the field, and the operator minimizes these losses by slowing down when necessary. The modern combine is a factory on wheels. As corn stalks enter the corn head, a series of rollers pull down the stalks and snap off the ears. An auger moves the ears into the combine, where they're conveyed into the threshing mechanism. Here, a spinning rotor threshes the kernels, removing them from the cob, while a strong fan blows out the leaves and chaff. The kernels are then conveyed to the combine's holding tank. On Sandahl's farm, the corn is offloaded onto trailers. The kernels are loaded into bins that will store the grain and complete the drying process. Corn is a crop with many uses. Everything from tortillas to corn syrup, animal feed and ethanol, a corn-based alternative fuel that is boosting demand across the Corn Belt. More than 7,000 years ago, it was a decidedly simpler crop. In the region that is now Mexico, natives began harvesting a wild grass called teosinte. Over thousands of years, the Mesoamericans domesticated teosinte by sowing and reaping only the best kernels. It evolved into a hardier, more productive plant known as maize, or corn. After its first migration north in about 1200 BC, it would become the most important crop in American agriculture.
When the Pilgrims first arrived, they planted in small hills, several seeds in a hill. They grew the corn, they harvested the ears, and they ground it into flour.
In the colonies, and for centuries that followed, corn was harvested by hand. The corn knife with an 18-inch blade was one of the original methods of cutting the stalks. When farmers were picking only the ears, handheld hooks or pegs made of iron and bone were the standard tools.
This is a bone peg that was probably used in 1890. They used anything that was sharp to open up the shucks at that time.
Gloves with embedded hooks later replaced the peg.
People in rural communities are very innovative, and so they were always looking for some way to do it better, to do it faster. The hooks and pegs allowed for faster harvesting because they could rip the shuck away from the ear, snap it, and harvest it much quicker than just by hand.
Even today, many rural communities still celebrate the days of hand harvesting with husking bee competitions. Ted Martin is a former Nebraska state champion.
Well, you grab the ear towards the end like this and come in with the hook crossways, open up the shucks, then you peel them back and you snap the ear out and throw it. And it's all one motion, really.
A fast husker could generally harvest about 100 bushels or 1 acre of corn per day. Once the whole corn ears were dry, the kernels had to be removed. For decades, nearly every farm was equipped with a hand-operated corn sheller.
Okay, we've got a couple cobs of corn. We're looking at a hand-powered corn sheller that's about 100 years old, and we're going to run a couple cobs through it. First, I'm going to crank it up. A couple plates inside the machine going in opposite directions are going to shear the kernels off. The corn kernels go down the bottom. The corn cobs come out the other end. And there's a fan at the bottom that blows some of the chaff away as well.
Many farmers harvested corn for silage or animal feed. This included the stalk as well as the ear. Silage was the first corn harvest to see mechanization in the form of the corn binder in the late 1800s. On one Nebraska farm, Ron Lang operates an antique corn binder to harvest feed for his horses.
It's an international corn binder. It cuts it and ties it. And this mainly used to be used more for green corn and fill silos with it. They would cut the corn green and haul it in and fill your silos.
The binder both cuts and then automatically ties the stalks into bundles with twine. The operator uses a foot clutch to engage a conveyor that drops the bundles in the field. Corn binders were usually followed by a crew of laborers who stood the bundles into larger upright stacks, known as shocks.
See, the shocking is for your winter feed, and it would mold and stuff on the ground. And the shocking is for curing. You got to shock it so the wind goes through it.
Up through the Great Depression, the meticulous hand harvest was still the only way to pick the ears directly. The first mechanized corn pickers powered by internal combustion engines debuted in the late 1930s and would soon double productivity to 15 acres in one day. The pickers selectively harvest only the corn ears, depositing the stalks back in the field. Farmer Randy Jensen uses a two-row 1960s model 237 John Deere picker to harvest 600 acres of corn each year. The picker uses rollers to snap the ears off the stalks. The ears travel to a husking bed where rubber rollers remove the husks. The clean ears then drop in a wagon.
When you come to the end, you'll have a full wagon most of the time, and you'll have a guy at the other end, and he'll switch wagons with you. And he'll take it home and run it to an elevator, which elevates it up into an ear corn crib. And basically that's all you do.
While the mechanical pickers endured for decades, they couldn't shell, clean, and dry corn on the fly. By the mid-1950s, there was an answer. The combine, which had long before mechanized the harvesting of other grain crops, was now advanced enough to produce clean corn kernels at a staggering pace. What began with two-row designs grew to the 12 and even 16-row corn head combines of the 21st century.
You're talking about the ability to harvest 4,000 or so bushels an hour, which translates to maybe 60 to 70 pounds of grain, clean grain, every second that this machine can harvest.
If we go back to working with a corn binder, we're talking about working maybe 8 acres a day, and now we're talking about hand picking, we're talking an acre or so a day, 100 bushels. Today's big farmers with large combines can do 40,000 bushels in a day with one combine.
The American corn harvest relies on the size, speed, and sophistication of one machine. But there is another uniquely American harvest that depends on a roll call of amphibious machines to beat, comb, and rake a colorful fruit into submission. Every year in October, there is a fruit that must first go for a swim before it can be picked. Just days before harvesting, farmers in central Wisconsin divert water from nearby reservoirs in order to flood thousands of acres of cranberries in up to 2 feet of water. This is called a wet harvest. The berries grow on short vines. When they mature, the fields are flooded to make harvesting easier. These water reel harvesters, also called beaters, will transform the marsh into a sea of red.
The first guy that goes in the water is opening the bed, and then the rest of the guys behind him just keep following along behind him. What they're looking for in the water is what we call a berry line, where you can see where the fruit's been picked clean and where the remaining fruit is. So you try to line up on that, and the idea is to not miss any fruit and beat it clean or pick it clean.
As the beaters move through the vine, they strip off the berries. Cranberries contain 4 air chambers. When freed from the vines, their natural buoyancy causes them to float.
Cranberries are trained, meaning the vines lay a certain direction. A good analogy would be like petting a cat the right way and the wrong way. You pet it the right way, everything's nice. You go against the vines or against that cat, his fur gets all ruffled up and it's not a very nice thing. Same thing can happen with cranberries. If we go against the vines, we'd rip them out of the ground and it would be a mess.
Once the 3-acre bed is beaten, the workers deploy a cran boom to slowly coax the flotilla to one end of the marsh. Here, more than 80,000 pounds of berries are loaded by elevator and trucked out. At the Ocean Spray receiving station, the berries are offloaded into holding tanks. And then conveyed into the packing house, where they're cleaned and then sized. These cranberries are destined for processing, meaning they will end up as juice, sauce, or even craisins, the cranberry equivalent of raisins. But long before cranberry juice and craisins dominated the market, Native Americans understood the power of the fresh berries, using them in medicines, poultices, and dyes. Dried berries were even pressed together with venison and fat to produce pemmican, a survival cake that kept for long periods of time. The first commercial growers in the 19th century recruited cheap field laborers, often women and children, to meticulously hand harvest the wild-growing vines.
When the men, women, and children would show up on the cranberry marsh, they were given a measure. Once they had a full measure, they would go over to the edge of the bed, dump the measure into the receptacle, and that picker was given a picking chip. That picking chip would be used for either cash or merchandise at the company store.
In the 1890s, the first cranberry hand rake replaced the picker's calloused fingers and quickly became the harvesting method of choice. Growers eventually discovered that flooding the cranberry beds made hand raking much easier.
This is the hand rake. It's got metal teeth with slots in it. As you rake, you go through the berries, through the vines like that. The berries are floating on top of the water. They're attached to the vines, but you still got to take them off. And it's a back-breaking job if you have to do it all day long, especially if the vines aren't trained.